sake of time, everyone will join us, continue to join, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So, good evening and welcome to our third Mary Talk of our 10th season. My name is Philip Duggins. I am with the Alumni Engagement Office here at Mary Washington, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event. We are excited to host a sizable audience of almost 500 for tonight's presentation, which includes alumni, students, parents, and friends from across the country and beyond. As with past lectures, there will be time after the presentation for our guests to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to ask a question by clicking on the Q&A icon below and submitting there, or vote for other submitted questions to help them rise to the top of the list. At this time, I'd like to introduce Megan Riley, class of 2022. Megan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Philip. Much appreciated. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here. You're in for quite a treat for tonight's lecture. On a quick personal note, Dr. Smith was an integral part of my time at Mary Washington and heavily has shaped me into the professional that I am today. As a freshman, I was undecided about my major until I took Historic Preservation 105, which is called the American Built Environment, with Dr. Smith. Her dynamism as a professor and educator inspired me to declare as a preservation major by about a month into my college career, and from then on, Dr. Smith became my advisor and urban planning mentor, even serving as my thesis advisor for my final semester. She's truly the coolest and most entertaining professor I've ever had, and I'm deeply, deeply honored to introduce her tonight. Dr. Smith has a BA in Architecture Studies and Comparative Literature from Brown University, a master's in historic preservation from the University of Vermont, and a PhD in urban and regional planning and design from the University of Maryland. Her dissertation was titled The Relationship Between Neighborhood Environment and Walking Behavior, The Influence of Perceptions. She currently serves as a professor of historic preservation at UMW and has previously held the positions of chair of the Department of Historic Preservation and director for the Center for Historic Preservation. She also co-hosts the podcast Verdegree with fellow historic preservation professor Dr. Christine Henry, where they discuss historic preservation, design, education, and history. A wonderful podcast. Dr. Smith was born in Paris, France, and moved to New York City as a teenager. Having grown up in cities known for their art, architecture, and urban planning, she's always been fascinated by the built environment, including the importance of high quality design and its integration with historic preservation. This love of good design inspires all of her courses that she teaches at UMW. This includes my personal favorite course of all time, Graves and Burial Grounds, which I was fortunate enough to take my senior year, which all of you will be getting a crash course in tonight. Finally, if you love what you learned here tonight, Dr. Smith often gives tours of many of the cemeteries in Fredericksburg and of Hollywood cemeteries and cemetery and others in Richmond for alumni events, and I cannot recommend those enough if you want to have fun and learn more about this fascinating topic. And on that note, I present my favorite personal and professional advisor, Dr. Andrea Smith.
Thank you so much, Riley. That was so sweet, and I will still never call you Megan. I'm sorry. It's never going to happen. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for deciding to spend your Wednesday evening with me to talk about dead people. We're going to have a fun time. And let me pull up my slides. So hopefully everyone can see my slides okay.
Good.
So as Riley noted, I teach a class on the design of cemeteries and gravestones. And in fact, I've been really fascinated with cemeteries and gravestones pretty much my entire life, which has entirely flummoxed my family, especially my parents have been really kind of upset by it, thinking, well, but it's so morbid, it's so depressing. Why are you so into it? And at first, I didn't really have an answer for them. I just liked it. But as I started paying attention to the cemeteries, going to them, visiting them quite a bit, I realized that really the cemeteries, they have everything. I don't know how else to put it. So when you look at a cemetery, I mean, the first thing I notice, and probably the first thing you might notice as well, is the art, right? The stones themselves, the monuments, and certainly that's really important. But when you start to dig deeper, you realize that it's also lots of symbolism, of course, lots of great typography. So if you're a fan of beautiful writing, you will see lots of that in cemeteries. It's also a place where you can learn a lot about geology, because a lot of these monuments are made of stone. It's a place you can learn about biology and especially horticulture, but also all sorts of aspects related to urban planning and public policy, right? Because as terrible as it is to say this, everybody eventually dies. And so cemeteries are a part of everybody's life. So not to be too cheesy about this, well, cemeteries are like the liberal arts. I teach at Mary Wash. I'm a true believer in the liberal arts. And when you walk into a cemetery and see one, it really is, arts and humanities and social sciences and hard sciences and everything kind of mixed in together. So there's kind of something for everybody. And what I'm going to try to do today, I cannot possibly talk about all the aspects of cemeteries. We definitely do not have the time. What I'm going to try to do instead is give you just a primer, just an idea of what a cemetery is, what the interesting things about it are, and how you can just, walk into a cemetery and just really enjoy your visit and have the words to describe what you'll see when you visit it. Now, with that in mind, we're not going to talk about a lot of the like really weird stuff, out there stuff like the colonial era burying grounds. We're not really going to talk about that very much. We're not going to talk about like extremely strange stones, although a couple. But just to give you an idea of what these places are so that you can enjoy them yourself. All right. So, how did cemeteries come about? Well, what we all have to understand is that cemeteries really did not exist in the colonial era in the United States. Well, we weren't the United States yet, of course. But when we were colonies, people died, of course. But when they did, they were buried in what we would call churchyards or graveyards. And very often that was in areas that were very, very close to the center of town, which would mean that it would be easy to access, easy to defend too. And honestly, that worked fine in the earliest days. But as America became more urbanized in the early 19th century, during the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, that really, really didn't work anymore. Imagine you're in a city like Boston or New York. By the early 1800s, New York had about 200,000 people, 300,000 people already. I mean, it was a pretty big city. And they were all cheek by jowl. And people were buried basically in the middle of town. So what you see on the left is Trinity Church that's highlighted. Trinity Church, a major, major church in New York. Really cool. There's still a churchyard there. But if you go there today, what you'll notice is that it's like half a block, the churchyard. It's not big at all. You can see a couple hundred stones and you might think, oh, a couple hundred people are buried there. No, like 10,000 people are buried there. And in fact, it's so many that if you walk there, the churchyard is about like 3 feet higher than the sidewalk. Okay.
Dr. Smith, I think we're still seeing the title slide.
Oh,
I'm
no.
not seeing Trinity Church.
Well, that's not good. Let's try that again then. Thank you. Let's see if I can do that again then. How about now?
I see the second slide.
You see the second slide. Okay. And let's see if I can show you the third slide. What about now?
There we go.
Hey, all right. Thanks, Riley. You're a lifesaver. Okay. So Trinity Church is in the middle of New York. And I mean, like you can see, it's like a block away from Wall Street. So that space would have been really, really overpopulated, pretty terribly so. The picture you see on the upper right is from Boston, actually from the Granary Burying Ground in Boston. And what you can see is that the stones are so close together that if you walk there, you are guaranteed to walk over many, many dead bodies. There's no space at all to walk in between. In fact, to the point where the few trees that are there actually are like growing around gravestones. So it's the point I'm trying to make here, other than the fact that it was pretty awful, is that this was a public health emergency. So what that meant at the time is that the city leaders were desperately trying to find a solution because there was just epidemic after epidemic. So cholera, typhus, yellow fever, you name it. It just kept coming through these cities. Now, mind you, this is before germ theory. It was still the miasma theory. They didn't really know exactly why dead bodies were bad, but they knew dead bodies were bad. And so the question became, how do we fix this? How do we set up a system where we can honor our dead, but not die of terrible epidemics? And the answer came from France. And not just because I'm from France, although, yes, I am, but it came from France. And especially from one cemetery in particular, which is the Père Lachaise Cemetery, which had opened in 1804. So France had literally just dealt with the same problem. Paris was a major city, and just like in the US, the burials were done very close to the center of town. In fact, in Paris, it was where Les Halles is today, so right next to the Seine River, which you don't need to be a scientist to know that's a very, very bad idea. And so after the revolution, the French government, at this point, Napoleon, when he was still a consul, set it up so that all of these burials were moved out of the middle of Paris and into the outskirts, and in particular to these areas that would be considered healthier. So you see one here, the Père Lachaise Cemetery. It's named after the father confessor of Louis XIV because this was his land, which is a little bit weird since it was established under Napoleon, but it is what it is. It's on the very north end of Paris in the 20th arrondissement. At the time it was established, it was actually outside of Paris on a hill. Being outside but close to a city and on a hill, those are very important because you need it to be accessible. You need people to get there, but you really need water to not stagnate in that area. And so being on a hill allows for runoff. When this cemetery was established, it was considered extremely forward-thinking, right? It was a municipal cemetery. And it very quickly became a runaway success and a place that many people copied, including pretty much the entire United States of America. So a couple things I want you to see on this slide is this is the gate of the cemetery. And you can see, first of all, that it has torches and swag, which symbolize eternal life. And also, if you can see the hourglass with wings, which mean tempus fugit, right? Time flies. So it's not shy about its symbolism by any means. Once you got inside the cemetery, what you saw was basically a beautiful park. The roads in the cemetery, other than one very formal alleyway, were all curvilinear, so providing you a nice, beautiful approach into the space. And the monuments are, some of them, just incredibly gorgeous. So the one on the left is one of my absolute favorites of the Haspai family, with this beautiful mourning figure, which is like maybe about 10 feet high. I mean, this is a very, very large sculpture. And you can see how the fabric is rendered in stone. It's really quite beautiful. So coming back to America, we have cities that are really struggling. And so in order to deal with this, they are going to try to find a solution, and they're going to go to Paris. Some of the city leaders of Boston are going to go to Paris first and see the Père Lachaise Cemetery, fall in love, bring it back to America, and then choose to build it. And so you see here the plan for Mount Auburn Cemetery, which was opened 30 years after the Père Lachaise and was entirely modeled on the Père Lachaise. So curvilinear, it's on a hill, it overlooks the main city, and this became the model. And I really cannot overstate how intensely influential this place was. So before it even opened, one of the leaders of the Massachusetts Horticultural Society made this quote in this address he delivered: "A holy and pleasant resort for the living, one of the most instructive, magnificent, and pleasant promenades in our country. From its immediate proximity to the capital of the state, it will attract universal interest and become a place of healthful, refreshing, and agreeable resort." What I really want you to get from this quote is there's no mention of the dead here, right? The thing that's really important with this establishment of the cemetery is it was from the beginning for the living. In fact, during the colonial period, the graveyards were really just for the remains, and the language really reflects that. It says like, "Here lies the body," right? It's very kind of dry and not very loving, almost, you could say, very fatalistic. And here, on the contrary, it's all about having people promenade, right? Have a good time. And the link between cemeteries and horticultural societies in America is like they went hand in hand. The cemeteries became these experimental gardens where these horticulturists, who, by the way, were incredibly important in this early development of American industry, right? They were getting to try these different things, grow these different plants, bring plants from around the world, which was not always the best idea. But this experimenting to create a garden of graves, that's really what was happening. And it was all to try to improve moral virtue, right? To impart this idea of goodness on people. And so what you see here are two photos and one painting of Mount Auburn. And yeah, I mean, it is incredibly gorgeous. It was an immediate success from the minute it opened. This picturesque view, right? Bear in mind, it is very, very manicured. This is not in any way a wild place, right? But this very manicured, very hand wrought nature was just immediately attracted everybody. And what that meant was everybody started spending their time in cemeteries. That word cemetery is itself an innovation at this time period. It had been used a little bit before, but the word cemetery really starts to appear in the 19th century. And notice it's not like a graveyard or a churchyard. It's derived from the Greek, right? It's that reflection of classicism, this interest in classicism, and it means sleeping place. So it's a very romantic, very Victorian view of death. Well, not quite the Victorian era yet, but we'll get there. So these places start taking over, and they are built all over the country. Basically, if you're a major city, you want to have a cemetery. So they're all going to be built following those same ideas. On a hill, if at all possible. That's not really possible in the Midwest, but in most places, it's going to have curvilinear roads. It's going to be close to, but not right in the city. And it's going to be beautifully landscaped with lots of trees and greenery. So what you see here is the plan for Hollywood Cemetery, one of the really beautiful ones. And as Riley noted, I would love to take you there. It's a really fun visit. Another one of my absolute favorites is Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, which again has those same features. It's on Park Slope. And basically by the mid-19th century, every major city in America had one of these. Now, how they administered each one is different in each place, and these are the kinds of weeds we're not going to get into tonight. But the point is, this is where everybody wanted to hang out. And this is something that honestly is no longer part of our everyday life, mostly for very good reasons, right? The fact is, in the 19th century, death was omnipresent. In fact, I have a quote here, if I can find it. So this is from a guide to mothers from the 19th century. And it says, and I quote, "So important do I consider cheerful association with death, that I wish to see our graveyards laid out with walks and trees and beautiful shrubs as places of promenade." Right? Death was everywhere all the time. And today, luckily we have much better science, we have much better life expectancy, and so death isn't an everyday aspect of life. So, um, on the one hand, the fact that we don't go to cemeteries all the time probably is not all a bad thing. However, what a lot of people today don't know is that cemeteries were the place to socialize, to get out of the city, and to be in contact with nature for most of the 19th century. For most of the 19th century, there were no public parks, none. So if you were an urbanite and you weren't incredibly rich, you never had a chance to, walk barefoot in the grass or just, hang out in the shade of a tree and not just see, spewing factories or whatever. And so these cemeteries became this, well, pleasure ground of death. This is an excellent book. I recommend it if you'd like to learn more. What you see on the right is postcards of cemeteries, which again to us seems quite strange, but in the 19th century and early 20th century was completely normal. These were so incredibly popular that people used to spend their weekends there, picnic there, and they had to, in fact, charge for tickets, especially for cars. Obviously, by that I mean with horses, um, and omnibuses. You had to pay for tickets, and you could not ride them in on Sundays. So this is how popular it was, so that the rich and the poor were able to go out into nature on Sundays. In fact, there's another quote from an Englishman who was a little bit shocked at this. And he said, again, I quote, "People lounge in them and use them as their tastes are inclined for walking, making love, weeping, sentimentalizing, and everything in short." So yeah, people hung out in them all the time. So here you see a picnic. Obviously, this is a little bit later because there's photography, but people used to spend all their time in them. So is it so strange that I want to spend a lot of time in them? I don't know. I don't think so. Here you see a picture of my now teenager frolicking in Hollywood Cemetery. And, I can't really think of a better place to hang out. Uh, because it's just a beautiful, peaceful, natural, enjoyable location. So, with that in mind, let's talk first about materials and then talk about all of the symbols and art forms that are involved here. So, if we're all ready for a little crash course in geology, I promise it will be painless and quick. There are three kinds of rocks: sedimentary rock, igneous rocks, and metamorphic rocks. All three of them are used in cemeteries. So, sedimentary rock, not to be confused with, well, let's see. Sedentary rock. I feel like I have misused that more than once, but sedimentary rock is rock that is formed by layers of sands, debris, etc. And over time, it just crushes and crushes and crushes. It's layered, so it's porous, but it's easy to shape. Shale, not very commonly used, but it does exist. But especially limestone and sandstone are very common in cemeteries. As I said, they're very easy to carve, but other than very specific types, they just melt. I mean, basically they're just compacted sand, really. So unless they're from very particular quarries, they tend to not be great. The exceptions, especially around here, are a quarry in Maryland, and especially all the quarries along the Hudson River in New York, which is where that New York brownstone comes from. Those can be quite durable. But in general, easy to carve, but it doesn't last very long. And by the way, brownstone gets its color from iron. So that's why it's this reddish brown. Next is igneous rock. So igneous rock is just cooled magma. It has very apparent crystals. It is very, very hard. And that makes it really durable. It makes it basically very difficult to carve other than with power tools, right? Power hammers, sandblasters, that kind of thing. It is really, really hard to carve granite. So granite doesn't really appear in gravestones until, halfway through the 19th century, just because it's so difficult to quarry and so difficult to shape. But once it's there, like nothing will hurt it. It'll last forever. And finally, metamorphic rock. Metamorphic rock is igneous or sedimentary rock that's been altered with heat and pressure. So basically, as it gets deeper underground, that added heat as you get closer to the Earth's core and the added pressure makes it change into something new. When I teach this in class, I actually use Pokemon, but I'm not sure if that would land with any of you, so I didn't. But anyway, in cemeteries, we really use two different kinds of stones that are metamorphic. One of them is slate. Slate was really used a lot in the colonial era. You see that in that bottom stone. And slates are always tablets. They're always like very thin because they're easy to cut in one direction, but not in the other direction. By the time the 19th century rolls around, we're not really using slate anymore. And instead, it's almost entirely marble. Marble, of course, is beautiful. It's white. It's very easy to carve. You can carve it in 3 dimensions, which you can't do with slate. So it's going to become the most popular stone in the 19th century. Unfortunately, it is also really, really not happy out in the elements. And so today, from a preservation standpoint, it makes it really hard to deal with because it's prone to cracking. It's prone to all sorts of lichen growths, which you see on the left here. It's also prone to an activity called sugaring, which is where basically the connective material in the stone just kind of melts away, especially in acid rain. And then it ends up looking like a, half dissolved sugar cube and loses its whole shape. So those are the 3 types of stone. In addition to those, of course, there are also tons of metals in cemeteries. Lots of bronze. Bronze is an alloy. It'll have copper and a bunch of other stuff in it. Bronze is great because generally it does not corrode. It gets this patina called verdigris, which resists the elements very well. And so you'll see that a lot on plaques attached to things. My favorite thing, some would call it my obsession, is the stone you see it's not a stone, the monument you see at the bottom here, which is called, and I quote, white bronze. And I love, love, love these monuments because they're not white, they're kind of bluish gray. They're not bronze. They're actually made of almost entirely pure zinc. So preservationists and cemetery enthusiasts often call them zinkers. And they are extremely, extremely common just from one short time period. I mean, basically, this was an affordable version of the monuments that richer people had made out of stone, but lightweight. You could buy it from a catalog. And so white bronze was just for advertising. I mean, it was just, yeah, because if you bought a gravestone and you were like, look, it's this bluish gray zinc, that doesn't sell very well. But white bronze, that's got character. And these were very popular from about the 1870s into the early 20th century, just before World War I. And you'll often see them just around different cemeteries. In addition to bronze and white bronze, not bronze, zinc, there are also lots of other features made with mostly iron, generally cast, sometimes wrought iron, and this was usually for fencing. So a lot of plots had edging of some kinds, which could be made of different materials. but very often these were made of iron. If you'll notice, the one on the bottom right is a section reserved for Civil War veterans. And so it's got guns and swords, sabers, made out of cast iron. And the one above it has upside down torches, which symbolizes death. So that brings us to all of the forms and symbols and styles that you can find in cemeteries, of which there are many, many, many. I'm going to start with the super basics and we'll go from there. So, monuments are generally gravestones, right? Again, I use the term stone even if it's not made out of stone. The basic one is the headstone that you see right there. The headstone is, well, exactly what it sounds like. These headstones are made usually quite thin, right? They're called tablets. So they're usually about like, I don't know, what is that? Like 3 inches thick. And when they're made just as tablets like this, they're actually sunk quite deep into the earth so that they stay straight. So they're usually about another length, right? So about half above ground and another half underground. So they're actually much, much longer than you think they are. In other formats, it'll just be a tablet on top of a base. Those are pretty common. Or it can just be an upright stone that's like thicker that just stands on its own. That happens too. Footstones were common in the colonial era, but are no longer very common in the 19th century, which is honestly good because footstones are very, very easy to trip over. Because they're much smaller and they often only come out of the ground this much, they'll tend to sink and then you don't see them. And when you walk through cemeteries, you really do need to watch your step. The other stone that you see on the right is called a ledger stone. So in the case of a ledger stone, and this is Eliza, the wife of Alexander Hamilton. In case you're interested, she's buried outside of Trinity Church in New York that I was talking to you about earlier. But what you can see with these ledger stones is that they're just flat on the ground. Usually they're raised a little bit, but not a lot. And they're beautiful. You can write a lot of stuff on them, but the downside is water is going to tend to collect on the ledger and little by little really, really hurt it. So these tend to have a lot of preservation issues. There's also many varieties of them. So a regular ledger stone like this one, there's table stones where, well, they're literally raised above the ground on poles, right? And there's also box versions. So all of these are different kinds of stones. In some cases, like in the case of the one on the left, you can see that there's a message at the bottom, and that message is called an epitaph. We're going to now have a little bit of a vocabulary lesson, but epitaph is from the Greek and it means upon the tomb. So it is language that is upon the tomb. Also notice the language on it, right? Sacred to the memory of, or in memory of. This is going to be a lot of the language that we're going to see in the 19th century instead of the very to the point, here lies the body of, which we really see in the colonial era. Now, of course, if you're richer, then you might not want just a stone. You might not even want just a family plot. You might want a full mausoleum. Mausoleum is after a Greek king named Mausolo or something like that. My pronunciation is probably terrible. But a mausoleum is a mansion for the dead. Sometimes they're built on or I should say against a hill like you see right there. This is very, well, how should I put this? It's very smart because it costs less. You're taking advantage of the hill in order to just create that very elaborate front space but then you don't need to create the rest of it. And so it definitely saves you a lot of money that way. And so you'll often see rows of them against a hill. And in some of my favorite ones, there's one in Hollywood Cemetery. I don't have a picture here, but I love it because the front of it has beautiful stone, really like complex ashlar, and it's very grand. And then as soon as you look on the side, they switch to much cheaper brick. So it's like a grave mullet. And I think it's kind of hilarious. But what you can see here too is the different styles. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. So just put a pin in that. And since I did show a picture of my younger daughter earlier, or my older daughter earlier, I have to show a picture of my younger daughter as well. This was during the COVID era. You can tell because she's wearing a mask. She's also wearing a tiara because she went everywhere with a tiara, including cemeteries. And this is Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in New York. So she was like, no, if you're going to take a picture of this mausoleum, I need to be in it. So another cool word that you've probably not heard before, as opposed to mausoleum, is exedra. So an exedra, this also comes from the Greek. It actually doesn't come from burials specifically. Exedra were relatively common architectural features in Greek architecture. And I know you'll tell me like, okay, this is just a bench. Correct. Yes, this is a bench. It is a circular bench, a semicircular bench, and it is meant to encourage conversation. That's the whole point, right? Is that you're supposed to sit on it and talk to other people on it. Exedra means literally seat and out, so an out-facing seat. And in the 19th century, you'll see many graves built directly into an exedra. And in some cases, it'll be the whole family plot and it'll have the family name. And then the different people will just have like a little section underneath with their name on it in the exedra. So lots and lots of 19th century cemeteries have these. Another really common feature in 19th century cemeteries, and that is becoming very, very popular today because it allows for a much more sustainable burial, is the columbarium. So on the left, you see the columbarium in the Père Lachaise Cemetery. It is a very, very large structure. Actually, it's 4 structures around a crematorium. But there are columbaria all over the place. And columbarium is again from the Greek, and it means dovecote, right? So imagine dovecotes or pigeonholes, right? Where all those birds are in their little niches. Well, it's the same thing except for cremains. So this allows for a more dense version of burial. And a lot of these are still personalized. Now, here in the US, we tend to be more conservative about this. In France, you would see lots and lots of very, very different decorations. One more word, and then we'll switch to styles a little bit. And that word is cenotaph. So just like epitaph, you will immediately know that cenotaph is related to death. Taph being grave, but cenotaph means an empty tomb. So a cenotaph is a grave or memorial that does not actually have the body interred there. So in many cases, of course, during wars, this happened a lot. Again, this is prior to embalming. So, dealing with the dead was a matter of safety. You had to deal with them quickly. But what that meant was very often you would have burials for people who were not, in fact, there. And so the word for that is cenotaph. Also notice the fonts here are really interesting. As we move into the 19th century, move through the 19th century, we will see more and more use of all capital letters. Raised letters, which is harder to carve, And my personal favorite, which I think we will see a little bit later, is the 19th century loved putting periods after everything. So they're just gonna just punctuate every single aspect on a gravestone, which is just, I think, very, very fun. All right. Which brings us to the actual styles, the actual designs. And basically the sky's the limit. I mean, you're going to see just about every kind of style in cemeteries. And many of them are going to be, well, about what you would expect. This is the gate, the second gate, actually, to Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. This is called High Victorian Gothic. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's tall, dark, and pointy. And you will see, of course, Gothic all over the place. Basically, well, again, pointy is the best I can say about it. But you're also going to see lots of classical elements. The classical elements that you'll see in the 19th century are, I think still familiar to us to this day. Things like urns and swags that symbolize, well, classical elements. We'll also see lots of upside down torches or right side up torches, sometimes next to each other, right? So right side up torches, eternal life, upside down torch, death. And we'll see that a lot. Um, some of the symbols, though, are symbols that we can understand and feel very confident in what they mean. So the one on the top left is a dove, right? A dove meaning peace, although unfortunately it is made of marble. And so at this point it looks more like a potato because erosion has really, really hurt the stone. Um, on the right, you see a broken column with a wreath. Now, wreaths were really, really death associated. And I know that today a lot of us use them, for Christmas or other holidays, but for a long time the wreath was just for death. But you can see here that it's a broken column, and clearly this is not vandalism, right? This was designed as a broken column. And in fact, a broken column was used as a symbol, a very on the nose symbol, if you ask me, of a young man who died in his prime. So that is a common symbol for that. Also, some symbols, we think we know what they mean because we are overly confident. So for instance, the anchor. And if you ask a person today, what does an anchor mean on a gravestone? They'll tell you, oh, they were a sea captain. Well, no, not necessarily. The anchor is a very common Christian symbol of hope. So yes, maybe they're associated with maritime items, but not necessarily. You really have to think about the context. Uh, Now, some items are, much, much more recognizable. Lots of angels, of course. The one that's really tough and always very upsetting to see is the lamb meaning innocence, and very commonly used on children's gravestones, which again are quite common in cemeteries. Um, but sometimes you'll see a sheep like this one. It's very abstract. I don't know. It looks like a loaf. But it also has the weeping willow, which again is a symbol of mourning that we're quite familiar with. Whereas other symbols of mourning we are much less familiar with. So here on the bottom right, you see there's a willow, but there's also a rose and lilies. These all had symbolic meaning. In fact, I know some of them off the top of my head. So let's see. The full-blown rose means prime of life, meant prime of life. Ivy meant memory. And you can see in the case of bathtub graves, they're not technically called bathtub graves, but that's what every preservationist calls them. They would actually have plantings inside the gravestone as well as on the gravestone. Here you can see more. So ivy meant memory, poppy meant sleep, lilies of the valley meant purity. The oak and acorn are both used quite a lot. in gravestones, the oak means immortality and the acorn means life. So all of these things that to us were just like, okay, lots of trees, lots of plants. No, at the time, these would have all meant something very specific. Uh, a lot of gravestones also have hands on them. Now, some of them are hands shaking. This was often from different Christian denominations, finger pointing up to heaven, to God, saying, I'm going to heaven. The one on the top left, though, you probably don't know about unless you're Jewish, but this symbol right here is the Kohanim priestly blessing. And although you might think you're not familiar with it, in fact, you are familiar with it because this is what it's supposed to look like. But if you take out that hand and you just look at the other hand, what I hope you'll recognize is Spock's "Live Long and Prosper." And of course, Leonard Nimoy was Jewish, and that's where he got it from. So you can learn lots of cool stuff in graveyards and cemeteries, including all about Star Trek, I guess. Okay, I want to finish today with my favorite, which is Egyptian revival. I'm a little bit obsessed with Egyptian revival because Egyptian revival is a style that we only really use for burials, which of course makes sense. Why would you use Egyptian revival for anything else, right? It's a style that is really well for the dead. Now, the really interesting thing about it is our whole fascination with Egyptian revival probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Napoleon. Again, back to Napoleon, right? We're going full circle. Because prior to him becoming consul, prior to him becoming emperor, he was a up and coming general, and everybody was really scared of him, and they desperately wanted to get him killed. So in order to do that, they sent him to Egypt to try to get him to die. Basically, it failed, obviously. And when he came back victorious and with thousands upon thousands of drawings of sites that had basically been lost to history, Western history anyway, for hundreds of years, right? So obviously he didn't draw them, but all of the artists and architects that he brought with him, they drew it. It became an absolute craze. So Egyptomania was a real thing in the 19th century. People were completely obsessed with everything related to Egypt, which explains why, for instance, the Washington Monument is a big obelisk, if you'd ever wondered. So this is going to absolutely overtake America. And I mean absolutely overtake America. So back to New York, you see here Alexander Hamilton's grave, which is, of course, a pyramid. Next to it, you see a picture from Savannah, which has an Egyptian mausoleum. Below it, you see a picture from Richmond with a bunch of obelisks, obelisks galore. Obelisks are so omnipresent that we just don't even think of them anymore. One of my favorite designs is this one. This is the gate for the cemetery in New Haven, Connecticut. Notice the all caps letters with the period at the end. The dead shall be raised. Wow, that is intense. They should film a zombie movie there. But notice how this gate is in a very particular design, and this is pure Egyptian revival. So it has these columns called palmiform columns. The walls are battered, right? They're wider on the bottom, and then they flare at the top. It has this rope detail, and then in the middle is the winged sun. And we're going to see this over and over and over again in cemetery after cemetery after cemetery. So here is one. This is going to be so popular. It is going to be absolutely everywhere. And I mean it. Go to any cemetery from the mid-19th century onward, and you're going to see Egyptian revival absolutely all over the place, including on the left, one of the rarest I've ever seen, which is a single palmiform column. So it's not an obelisk, it's an actual Egyptian column. This is in Richmond's Hollywood Cemetery. So come to Hollywood Cemetery, you can see this with me. It's very cool. And on the right, you'll see an obelisk also in Richmond. This one not in Hollywood. It also got shot which is not great. But this one is in white bronze, right? So again, the very rich and the people of very modest means all had Egyptian revival. And the reason that I'm obsessed with Egyptian revival is it entirely transcended religious belief. Like everybody had their gravestone, their monument in Egyptian revival, which leads me to one of my absolute favorite monuments. It is in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. I've been there many times. I've dragged my sister there all the time. Speaking of my sister, I don't know if any of you can see my mug, but she gave me this mug which says support your local cemeteries. So please do that. All right, you've waited long enough. Okay. Now, the first thing you'll see is that it's a pyramid. It's got the front with the winged sun. This is the Van Ness Parsons monument. They were deeply religious. I just want to say that for the record, they were deeply religious. And what you'll notice is this is such an incredibly strange grouping of items because there is in front of this pyramid the Virgin Mary holding the baby Jesus, a adoring, I guess, pet sphinx looking with love at the baby Jesus, and on the other side of the door, and I absolutely cannot make this up, Moses. It's Moses in front of a pyramid, which the cognitive dissonance to put all these items together is just incredible. It's just incredible. Okay. So I've been talking for a long time. I'm going to finish up by saying a couple of things. The most important, cemeteries are for the living. If we don't use these places, they are useless. If we don't go to these places, if we don't walk around and enjoy ourselves in these places, what's the point of having them? The dead don't care. And honestly, I don't think it's any more respectful to the dead to avoid those places than it is to go there and have a good time. Now, that doesn't mean anything goes, obviously. Many cemeteries have rules, but you can do lots of things in cemeteries that are wonderful. So I was walking through the cemetery in Chicago a year and a half ago, and this woman was painting. Of course, I asked her permission before taking this photo. And, what better place to hang out in and take make beautiful art? Running or walking or just exercising in these places is delightful. And many cemeteries these days have tried to find ways to attract more people to spend time there, including having movie screenings, because, that's what they're there for. They're there to be there, enjoy the space, and really, have a good time. So with that, I thank you very much. And I will open it to questions. And I will also plug my podcast one more time.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Please, once again, if you have questions, you can enter those in the Q&A box down at the bottom. But we do have some questions that have already been entered, so we'll start going through those. Is there any way to save or preserve really, really old stones? I remember seeing a very old one near Stonewall Jackson's grave in Lexington, Virginia, and wish there was a way to refurbish it.
Okay, so you'll notice that I didn't really talk about preservation in this lecture because that requires a whole lot more context. The problem with trying to preserve stones is if you don't know what you're doing, you are going to potentially kickstart chemical reactions, which can never, ever be unstopped. You can't put that bunny back in the bag. Man, I'm mixing metaphors here. If you really, really want to clean a stone, number one, make sure you have permission to do so first. You'll see lots of things on the internet of, these good Samaritans going and cleaning gravestones. Unless you have permission, that's vandalism. That's not being a good Samaritan. If you are going to try to clean a gravestone, always use the gentlest means possible. So that means a natural bristle brush, Uh, just lukewarm water. That's it. Don't do anything else. Anything else you're going to do runs the risk of damaging the stone. So, for instance, one thing I've seen in the past, especially with marble, is people will bleach the marble because it'll make it gorgeous. It'll shine for about a week, and then it will dissolve into nothing. So, please, 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 if you're going to try to preserve a stone, be very, very gentle and talk to a professional first.
The next question, why are gravestones so expensive? Have they been hit by inflation like a lot of other things?
Oh, yes. So, gravestones are very expensive because well, you need good stone in order to make a gravestone in the first place. It is very heavy. If you've ever tried to lift granite, you will know it is extremely heavy. These days, a lot of gravestones are actually engraved through either power hammers or actually sandblasting is what's most common. But it's a very labor-intensive process. And it's a skilled process. Even with the sandblasting, it's a skilled process. And so um, they're very, very expensive. They're not going to get any less expensive.
The next one is, what is the location of the exedra with the female figure sitting on it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't remember. I'll have to look that one up and get back to you. Um, yeah.
Okay, the next one is, what are your favorite cemeteries in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, um, Congressional Cemetery is really nice. It's got some really cool stones. I haven't really hung out there very, very much. To be honest, I really prefer the rural cemetery. So this style of cemetery is called a rural cemetery, which is very confusing because they're not in the countryside, right? They're just outside of cities usually. But I really love finding the ones in like small to mid-sized cities. For instance, Stanton has a really gorgeous one. I mean, just absolutely beautiful. So it's the kind of thing where if you find yourself in a town, for a conference or just for travel or whatever, you just find that cemetery and go there. And I drag my family to that every single time.
Okay. Next question, is this true? I've heard that cemeteries are buried on hills, especially prior to embalmment, so that during decomposing, the fluids would go downhill. Also, I've learned that cedar trees were planted to surround cemeteries to mask the odors from the decomposing body. Are these true?
So decomposing bodies were definitely a problem. One of the really big issues too, especially in the north, was that the you really couldn't bury anyone during the winter. So you would put people in what's called a receiving vault during the winter and basically leave them in the fridge, for lack of a better word, until the land thawed enough. Now, if you bury people properly, it doesn't smell. Um, and you don't need embalming or anything like that. In fact, many religions don't allow for embalming at all. The issue is that a lot of the burials that we did, especially in those early days, and especially in potter's fields, I mean, I'm sorry, this is going to get pretty gross. They would just dig a giant hole and then pile people in. And then they would just put some lye on top of them to both help dissolve the bodies and also to compact them a little bit. And then once you only have bones, you can either put them in an ossuary or you can actually use those bones um, because that you can grind them up and use them for other materials. Yeah, sorry. It gets a little bit gnarly.
Okay. Next one is, where is Hollywood Cemetery you keep mentioning? Is this literally in Hollywood, California?
No, 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 no. Hollywood Cemetery is in our very own Richmond, Virginia. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous cemetery. It is definitely one of the real jewels. So if you're in Richmond, you can, go to Carytown, go get a nice meal, and then go walk around the cemetery. If Philip or anyone else at alumni office wants to wants me to do it again, I'm happy to give another tour. It is, pick a nice sunny day and just walk around.
Okay. Um, could you speak about if or how cemeteries for people of color in America might differ from what you've shown us this evening?
Oh, yes. So it's not just people of color. It's actually all people who were not Protestants and white. So here in Fredericksburg, for instance, when our cemetery was established, now mind you, ours is not curvilinear, ours is much simpler, but it was divided in four, and each one of them was a different denomination. I'm going to get this wrong. Uh, Episcopalian, Methodist, Lutheran, and Baptist. So if you were not one of those four, or if you were a person of color, then you were not welcome. You were not welcome there. You could not be buried there. Now, in terms of cemeteries, so-called rural cemeteries from that part of the 19th century, it entirely depends on where you are in the U.S. Some cemeteries allowed for every kind of person to be buried there. Some cemeteries had different sections for different groups. So, for instance, they would have an African American section, they would have a Jewish section, they would have a Catholic section, etc. And some were entirely segregated. Hollywood was entirely segregated. So it really depends on the cemetery. Now, that said, there are some absolutely gorgeous cemeteries, either Black cemeteries, but also Jewish cemeteries, all around the East Coast. In some cases, the Protestant white cemetery is here, and then the cemetery for the Jewish population or the African American population is literally like across the street. That's true, for instance, in Charlottesville, right? So there's the main cemetery, and then you just literally walk across the street, and it's the Black cemetery. In other places, the cemetery will be more removed, in large part because of hate crimes, honestly. So that's true in places like Richmond, which had both Evergreen and East End cemeteries, which were established a little bit later in the 1890s, but were there for the luminaries of the Black community there.
All right. Curious what your all-time favorite symbol on gravestones, grave markers is. Not really a symbol, but I remember the boobfish grave marker from our Paris trip in 2022, fondly. Also, I'm reading Midnight in the Garden of Good and
Oh,
Evil about
yeah.
Savannah, Georgia, which mentions a bench as a gravestone, which I thought was lovely. Glad to know there's a word for it. Love learning with you again tonight. Hope you and your family are well. And that's Eleanor Hill.
Oh, that's so nice. Uh, Hi, Ellie. So yes, so uh, for those of you who have not been to Paris, I'm going to share my screen again just to show you this guy so that you don't think that I'm just making things up. Um, all right, can you see it? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So there is a grave in Paris, which is called the Fish Mermaid, which I like. There's no nicer way to say it. It's a fish with boobs, hence boob fish. It is a. I'm trying to. My image is moving very slow. Here we go. So this is the back of it, and this is the front, and it's. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It is a very cool. It is a very cool grave. And I think this is the part that I love the most about graves is when they're personal. I don't really, I don't know that I have a favorite symbol. I just love when you learn something about people and really feel like you're kind of communing with them for a minute, from beyond the grave. There's something really truly beautiful and poetic about that. And so I like all graves where there's something really personal about them. I especially love gorgeous epitaphs. There is one that I still remember. I read it in a book and I still remember it many, many years later, and it said, raised four daughters in a house with only one bathroom, and still there was love. And like I feel like I know that family and I want to hang out with them. And yeah, that's my favorite.
Okay. There's Diane mentions there's a good source for additional information, Association for Gravestone Studies,
Oh, yes.
gravestonestudies.org. And then, are you familiar with the cemetery on Montparnasse in Paris
Yes.
14th,
Yes, the
2 blocks
Montparnasse
away?
Cemetery. So my mom lives actually facing the Montparnasse Cemetery on the Boulevard Raspail. I've been to the Montparnasse Cemetery a lot. That's where Jean-Paul Sartre is buried, among many, many other people. Um, it's a gorgeous cemetery. I would love to take people there if anyone ever wants to go with me. One of my favorite things there, because going back to the Van Ness Parsons grave, I used to kind of joke that like no Jewish person would do this, right? Put Egyptian revival like on their gravestone. And then I went back to the Montparnasse Cemetery, and there are full-blown Egyptian revival Jewish mausolea there. And the only thing that they refuse to do is put the winged sun. That's a step too far. So it's a sunflower instead. But like that part, I was just like, wow, I did not expect to see that. And again, you discover all sorts of new things.
Have you been to the La Recoleta Cemetery in Buenos Aires? I was
I've
amazed at the size, but how it was literally falling apart, especially the mausoleums.
I've never had the chance to go to South America. I would love to go there. So this is unfortunately, this is exactly why it is so very important to go to cemeteries. If we don't go, there's no reason for them to exist, and then they'll just fall apart. And honestly, that's how cemeteries struggle today, is once they fill, if they fill, then how do they make money, right? Because fundamentally, they have to make money. So go to a cemetery, right? Go to a cemetery and spend time there. You know, that's the best thing you can do for preservation.
Okay. And we're getting close to the end of time here, but I'm going to ask one or two more questions.
Sure.
What are the biggest interesting differences between Christian and Jewish cemeteries in the USA?
What are the big differences? Oh my gosh, there's lots. Jews traditionally bury their dead within 24 hours. That is important. There's no embalming. And the whole way of burial is very, very different. Furthermore, it is very normal for Jewish burials for the person to be buried, and then the 1 year later is when you unveil the gravestone, which makes sense, right? Because it takes a while to have a gravestone. And it's not immediate when, you're trying to bury the person within 24 hours. The other thing that's really important with Jewish gravestones, just in case you go to a Jewish cemetery, please never ever leave live plants. That is considered really, really disrespectful because plants die. So the respectful thing to do if you go to a Jewish cemetery is to leave a pebble on the gravestone, because stones don't die, right? So that shows your love and your attention in a way that is durable.
And this will be our last question. I know there are others in the comments, but we just are running short on time. And it is: Do you include pet cemeteries in your studies?
I do. In my class, the final project is open. Anyone can do kind of whatever they want. And quite a few students in the past have looked at pet cemeteries. One of my favorite projects actually looked at the difference between how cats and dogs are treated in death, and in particular in symbolism, because cats were considered very bad luck for a very long time, and dogs were considered and are still considered, right, a symbol of loyalty and love. And so yes, there's very interesting stuff about pet cemeteries, and both what's allowable in pet cemeteries and also in human cemeteries, whether you're allowed to bury your pet there or not. In general, the answer is no, but not always.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Smith, for joining us this evening. I'd also like to thank Mark Simpkins from Events AV, who helped facilitate the virtual logistics of tonight's program. And thanks again to our viewers at home for joining us and being a part of the conversation. Remember that this presentation will be available for viewing on the UMW YouTube channel by this time next week. There you can watch this program and browse the full catalog of Mary Talks. Our 10th season of Mary Talks will continue on April 15th with Dr. Jason Sellers, Associate Professor of History and American Studies, and he will be talking about Fredericksburg's role in the American Revolution. Keep an eye out for more information for our next presentation. We look forward to seeing you then, if not earlier. Thank you and good night.